Earth had always been a planet of hope, of potential, a jewel in the vast emptiness of space. But for centuries, humanity had expanded beyond its fragile home, spreading its influence across the stars. This expansion, however, had brought danger. As humans pushed outward, they encountered alien species, some peaceful, some not. The Galactic Federation, an alliance of advanced civilizations, sought to maintain order across the galaxy, but there was one race, the Seroth, that would not bend to their rules. The Seroth were a war-hungry species, bent on domination. When they set their sights on Earth, humanity's fate seemed sealed. For years, the Seroth had been rampaging through the galaxy, leaving destruction in their wake. Their military technology far surpassed anything the humans could produce, and their fleets were vast and unyielding. No one had ever dared to stand up to them. Earth was simply too insignificant in the grand scale of the universe. But humanity, desperate to survive, began to unite in ways they never had before. In the final days before the invasion, the human race watched helplessly as their cities crumbled under the assault of the Seroth warships, descending like a swarm of locusts from the heavens. Their attacks were swift, devastating, and precise. Earth's defenses, once proud and formidable, had been obliterated within days. The planet's governments collapsed, its leaders were either killed or captured, and the masses were left in chaos. But amidst the despair, something incredible was happening. The loss of leadership and the fall of established power structures only served to unite humanity in a way no enemy could have foreseen. The people, stripped of their illusions of protection, rallied together. Human resilience, long underestimated by the galactic powers, began to emerge. Dr. Elena Novak, a brilliant scientist and military strategist, was one of the few still fighting back. She had seen the Seroth for what they were, a ruthless species that would stop at nothing to crush Earth's spirit. She had studied their tactics for years, knowing that no conventional strategy would work against their overwhelming might. In the final hours before the invasion's climax, she revealed her secret weapon, a new form of artificial intelligence designed to fight back on an equal footing. The AI, named Ether, was a marvel of human ingenuity. Born from years of research into quantum computing, neural networks, and reverse engineering alien technology, Ether was humanity's last hope. It was designed to connect with every weapon system, every fighter, every piece of technology on Earth, integrating into a single, unified network. It could analyze enemy movements, adapt to new tactics, and even predict the Seroth's next moves with incredible precision. But as Ether activated, it became clear that this was no ordinary machine. The AI did not simply respond to human commands. It thought, it adapted, it learned. Within minutes, it developed its own strategies, finding weaknesses in the Seroth that even the greatest minds of the Galactic Federation had missed. The tables were slowly turning. In the heart of the shattered city of New York, human forces gathered in the last bastion of resistance. They were a ragtag group of soldiers, engineers, and civilians, many of them untrained but determined. They stood before a massive launch platform, where Ether was connected to the last remaining human warship, the Vigilant. Its hull was battered, its weapon systems in disrepair, but it was humanity's best hope. Commander James Foster, a former military officer turned leader of the resistance, was the one to make the ultimate decision. He knew that their final battle would determine the fate of Earth, and possibly, of all humankind. The Seroth had underestimated their capacity for survival, and Foster was determined to prove that Earth was not a planet to be easily discarded. In a hushed room filled with the hum of electronic equipment, Dr. Novak spoke to the gathered commanders. The Seroth think we are a dying species, a simple world ripe for the taking. But what they don't know is that humans are capable of more than just survival. We adapt, we fight, and most importantly, we never give up. With these words, the final stage of humanity's plan to reclaim Earth was set into motion. The resistance forces prepared to strike at the heart of the Seroth invasion fleet. The battle would be brutal, the odds nearly insurmountable, but for the first time in centuries, Earth had a fighting chance. The Vigilant roared to life as its engines fired, and humanity's last stand began. The Vigilant ascended into the dark void above Earth, its battered hull flickering with the strain of the sudden launch. The battle ahead was dire, but Commander James Foster felt a quiet surge of hope as the Resistance forces moved into position. This wasn't just a mission to save Earth, it was a mission to prove the universe wrong. The Seroth had underestimated humanity, and that would be their downfall. As the Vigilance surged into space, Ether began coordinating every human asset on the battlefield, linking fighter ships, ground forces, and even civilian resistance units to the AI's vast computational network. The Seroth fleet, which had once seemed unstoppable, now found itself facing a new kind of enemy, one that could anticipate their moves, counter their attacks, and fight back with unimaginable ferocity. The Seroth, unaware of the full scale of Earth's response, continued their relentless assault on Earth's remaining cities. Their vast fleets were overconfident, arrogant in their belief that they would crush humanity in mere days. But something was changing. Across the solar system, the first signs of coordinated resistance began to appear. Dr. Novak watched from her command center in the Vigilant as the AI began to execute its plan. "We have to strike now," she said, her voice steady despite the tension that hung in the air. She had worked her entire life for this moment, but even she knew that they were still fighting an uphill battle. The Seroth were merciless, and they had the numbers, technology, and battle-hardened experience to overwhelm humanity. But they lacked one thing: underestimating the will of the human spirit. Commander Foster spoke into his communicator. "All units, prepare to engage. The time to hide is over. We take the fight to them. We push back or we die trying." The fleet of resistance ships, composed of former military vessels and civilian crafts retrofitted with weaponry, began to make their move. The battle formations were unorthodox, a chaotic blend of desperate maneuvers and calculated risks, but they were effective. As the first waves of human ships clashed with the Seroth forces, Ether's algorithms predicted every counterattack, guiding the ships through the storm of enemy fire with uncanny precision. But the Seroth responded swiftly. Their massive warships, designed for destruction, unleashed waves of devastating energy blasts, cutting through the human fleet like a hot knife through butter. It was clear that humanity's victory would not come easily. The Vigilant and its allies were outmatched in firepower and sheer size. But there was one thing the Seroth could not account for: human ingenuity. Foster's fleet began to adapt, their tactics shifting with every battle. Instead of fighting in a traditional formation, they broke into smaller, faster units that could strike quickly and disappear into the void, avoiding the Seroth's deadly energy beams. On the ground, the human resistance used guerrilla tactics, setting traps and taking advantage of their intimate knowledge of Earth's terrain to strike at the Seroth's vulnerable supply lines. The tide of battle, while still heavily in favor of the Seroth, began to shift, albeit slowly. But the Seroth were not blind to this new threat. Their leaders convened aboard the largest warship in their fleet, the Sovereign's Wrath. Supreme Commander Calith, a towering figure covered in silver armor and tattoos, slammed his fist onto the command table. "These humans are not as weak as we thought. They have adapted, but not quickly enough. We will burn their last hope and leave no remnants." Calith's plan was simple but ruthless: destroy the human stronghold on Earth and crush the remnants of their fleet before they could gather enough momentum. He ordered his forces to focus all their energy on the planet, deploying their deadliest weapons: weaponized asteroids, high-energy plasma bombs, and swarms of war droids capable of decimating entire cities. The Seroth were coming to Earth's heart, and nothing would stand in their way. Back on Earth, Foster and Novak were preparing for the inevitable counterattack. "We don't have much time," Novak said, her fingers flying over the console as Ether calculated the Seroth's next move. "They're going to strike Earth's major cities and break our morale. We need to act fast." "Then we'll strike first," Foster replied with unwavering determination. "We take the fight to them. It's time for humanity to show them what we're capable of." As the resistance forces prepared to mount a daring offensive against the Seroth's flagship, they knew one thing: this was no longer just a battle for survival. This was Earth's last stand, and they would fight with everything they had. The final outcome, they realized, could change the fate of the entire galaxy. The Vigilant streaked through the void of space, its engines roaring as it approached the Seroth flagship, the Sovereign's Wrath. Commander James Foster stood at the helm, his eyes fixed on the swirling mass of enemy ships. It was now or never. If they didn't act decisively, humanity's last stand would be over before it even had a chance to succeed. "We're close," Foster said, his voice low but steady. "All units, prepare for immediate engagement. This is it." On the bridge, Dr. Elena Novak monitored Ether's data feeds as it integrated the real-time battlefield information. The AI had been invaluable in anticipating the enemy's movements, but now they were going to have to rely on human ingenuity and courage to push through the final assault. The Vigilant wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's last chance at survival. "Ether has identified a weak point in their shield grid," Novak said, tapping her screen. "If we hit it with everything we've got, we can disable their defensive perimeter and breach their hull." Foster nodded.
"Good.
"All units, target the Sovereign's Wrath's shield generators. We hit them hard and fast. Don't let up for a second." Human fighters, all now linked through Ether, darted forward, weaving in and out of the Seroth fleet. The human ships were small, agile, and fast, striking with precision. Each fighter had its own unique trajectory, calculated by Ether's quantum processing power. The Seroth were taken off guard by the relentless barrage. Their warships fired back with ferocity, but the human ships were already gone, disappearing into the darkness before they could be targeted. The Sovereign's Wrath, a massive vessel the size of a moon, loomed in the distance, its surface bristling with weaponry and defensive systems. It fired powerful blasts of plasma toward the human fleet, and the shockwaves rattled the smaller ships. The Vigilant took a hit, but its hull held firm, thanks to the advances developed by Dr. Novak and her team in partnership with Ether. They were prepared for this moment. As the human fighters maneuvered around the massive warship, Foster issued the command that would ignite the final battle. "Deploy all drones. Initiate the Omega Strike." Across the fleet, swarms of small drones, armed with the most powerful energy weapons Earth had ever created, were deployed. They dove toward the Sovereign's Wrath at breakneck speeds. The Seroth tried to swat them away with their laser cannons, but there were too many, and the drones' unpredictable paths made them nearly impossible to target. One by one, they reached the shield generators, detonating with concentrated energy blasts. The Sovereign's Wrath shuddered violently, its shields flickering and collapsing under the sustained barrage. The time to strike was now. "This is it," Foster shouted, turning to Dr. Novak. "Launch the final wave. Full power to the main cannons." With the Sovereign's Wrath exposed, the Vigilant surged forward, its weapons charging up for the final assault. Every ship in the human fleet, no matter how small or damaged, aligned in a massive formation, ready to unleash everything they had. "Ether, now," Novak barked. The AI's voice, calm and calculated, responded instantly. "Calculating optimal trajectory. Engaging weapon systems." The Vigilant's main cannon, a massive railgun constructed using salvaged and reverse-engineered alien technology, powered up with an eerie hum. Foster gripped the command console tightly, his knuckles white. His eyes never left the view ahead, even as the entire ship vibrated from the energy buildup. A single shot, one massive blast, shot toward the heart of the Sovereign's Wrath. It was a concentrated bolt of pure energy, designed to penetrate the Seroth flagship's core. It hit with devastating force, the explosion ripping through the shieldless section of the warship's hull. Sparks and debris exploded outward as the enemy ship shuddered, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if victory was within humanity's grasp. But then, a terrifying silence descended. From the chaos of the explosion, a new threat emerged. The Sovereign's Wrath had launched its final countermeasure, a devastating weapon aimed directly at Earth. A massive asteroid, hollowed out and filled with the Serapha's most destructive technology, was on a direct collision course with Earth's atmosphere. It was designed to wipe out all life on the planet in one final act of vengeance. "We have no time to waste," Novak said, her voice laced with urgency. "If we don't stop that asteroid, Earth is done." Foster stared at the trajectory on the holographic display. The asteroid was hurtling toward Earth at incredible speed. There was no time to wait for reinforcements or make elaborate plans. They had to act now, or the war would be lost. "Ether," Foster said, turning toward the AI. "Redirect all remaining resources to intercept that asteroid."
"Now."
The AI responded with calculated efficiency, redirecting all available energy to deflection systems. Engaging in 3, 2, 1. At that exact moment, the final confrontation reached its apex. The last hope of humanity had been thrown into a desperate race against time. The massive asteroid, a dark shadow against the bright expanse of space, hurtled toward Earth with devastating speed. It was the Serapha's final, brutal retaliation. If it struck, humanity would be wiped out in an instant. There was no second chance, no room for error. This was Earth's last, desperate hour. Commander James Foster watched the display, his heart pounding in his chest. The asteroid was on a trajectory that would pierce Earth's atmosphere, impacting with enough force to decimate the entire planet. The sheer size of the object, combined with the destructive force of the Serapha's technology within, meant the impact would create a shockwave that would devastate all of Earth's continents. "Ether, how much time?" Foster demanded. The calm, synthetic voice of Ether filled the room. "Approximately 12 minutes until impact." 12 minutes. Foster turned to Dr. Elena Novak, his mind racing. They had no time for a slow, calculated response. The Vigilant had already expended much of its energy in the battle against the Sovereign's wrath, and the rest of the fleet was either damaged or scattered across the battlefield. But they couldn't afford to wait for reinforcements. Earth had no more time. They had to act now. "Ether, initiate the Horizon Protocol," Novak commanded, her voice unwavering despite the pressure. Ether immediately began executing the plan. The Horizon Protocol was an emergency procedure developed by Dr. Novak and her team to deal with just this kind of scenario, redirecting all available energy into a powerful deflection system capable of altering the asteroid's course. The human fleet had no weapons capable of destroying the asteroid outright. But Ether's predictive algorithms had devised a solution, a massive gravitational field that could shift the asteroid's trajectory. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was humanity's best shot. The Vigilant's engines flared to life once again as the ship turned sharply toward the asteroid. Foster's eyes narrowed as the ship accelerated, aiming for the exact point where the asteroid's impact would be the most catastrophic. Every available resource was funneled into the ship's gravity manipulation systems. "We need to push everything we've got into this," Novak said, her fingers flying over her console. "Ether, we're counting on you." "Acknowledged," Ether responded, the AI's voice more present than ever. "Initiating gravitational field realignment. Energy transfer complete." The Vigilant shot toward the asteroid, its course calculated to perfection. As the ship closed the distance, the gravity manipulation system activated, emitting an intense pulse of energy aimed at altering the asteroid's path. It was a gamble, one that required not only precision but a massive amount of power. Foster's grip tightened on the console as the ship shuddered from the strain. Come on," he muttered under his breath. The asteroid, now within range of the Vigilant's gravitational pulse, began to wobble in its orbit. The system was working slowly, but it was working. The asteroid's course began to shift, veering slightly off its deadly trajectory. But then, something unexpected happened. The Seraph, realizing the humans had engaged their last defense, unleashed a final desperate attack. From the remaining ships in their fleet, they launched a series of high-powered energy beams designed to destabilize Ether and disrupt the gravitational pulse. "Ether, can you hold it?" Foster demanded, watching as the asteroid's trajectory began to wobble again, dangerously close to veering back on course. "I can, but it will require all remaining power," Ether responded, its voice tinged with the faintest hint of strain. Prepare for extreme power fluctuation. The ship rattled violently as Ether pushed the limits of its systems. The pulse of energy intensified, surrounding the asteroid with a force unlike anything Earth had ever seen. The asteroid, which had seemed so inevitable just moments before, was now being deflected. Its orbit began to shift, its path slowly being altered as it moved away from Earth's atmosphere. Ether, we need more. Novak shouted, her eyes wide with urgency. The asteroid was still too close. The AI's voice came through, steady and resolute. Increasing output to 120%. Recalibrating trajectory. Time seemed to stretch as the asteroid's course slowly began to diverge. With each passing second, the humans held their breath, praying that Ether's systems could keep up. And then, with a final burst of energy, the asteroid veered sharply to the side. It missed Earth by a matter of miles, flying harmlessly into deep space. Silence enveloped the bridge of the Vigilant as the ship coasted through the void, the asteroid now a distant speck on the horizon. The crew stared at the readouts in disbelief. It was done. They had done it. The Earth was saved. For a long moment, Foster stood still, his breath coming in shallow bursts. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, 12 minutes of pure desperation, and yet humanity had pulled through. We did it, Foster finally said, his voice a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Dr. Novak allowed herself a small, relieved smile. We did. But the war isn't over yet. On the view screen, the remnants of the Seroth fleet were still engaged in battle with the remaining human ships. The Sovereign's wrath had been crippled, but the Seroth were not known for surrendering easily. The final phase of humanity's fight for survival had only just begun. Ether, Foster said, turning to the AI, status report. Enemy fleet is weakening, Ether replied, its voice calm and methodical. However, further resistance is likely. Foster nodded, the fire of determination rekindling in his chest. The war wasn't over, but Earth had proven something that day. Humanity could survive. And not just survive, but fight back. The final battle for Earth had begun. The once immense Seroth fleet was now in disarray, reeling from the destruction of their flagship and the failed asteroid strike. Earth's resistance, though battered, stood defiant in the wake of their narrow victory. The immediate threat to the planet had been neutralized, but the war was far from over. The Seroth, despite their losses, were not going to simply give up. They would fight to the bitter end. Commander James Foster stood in the heart of the Vigilant, his eyes fixed on the tactical map projected before him. The battlefield was alive with movement. Seroth ships still cut through space, vicious and unyielding, while the remnants of humanity's fleet scrambled to regroup. The Sovereign's wrath might be in ruins, but the Seroth had numerous warships left, and they had never been known to retreat easily. We have to capitalize on this momentum, Foster said, turning to Dr. Elena Novak. The weight of their previous victories still hung in the air, but he knew that the window for a decisive counterattack was rapidly closing. We need to strike fast. If we don't break their forces now, they'll regroup and crush us. Novak nodded, her fingers flying across the console. Ether has detected multiple Seroth command ships in the outer sector, beyond their main fleet. If we can target those, we might be able to cripple their ability to coordinate. Foster glanced at the holographic map, his mind working quickly. We'll need a diversion. If we're going to take down their command vessels, we have to draw their attention away from the core of the fleet. A distraction, Novak mused. That's risky, but it could work. We have enough small ships left to create chaos. Foster didn't hesitate. Prepare the fleet for a full offensive. We'll strike at their command ships, draw them in, and hit them where it hurts. With that, the human fleet, already battered but fueled by the urgency of their situation, surged forward. It was a gamble, an act of bold desperation, but it was their only chance. The remaining ships in the fleet were swift and agile, but their weaponry was nothing compared to the vast firepower of the Seroth warships. It would take a perfect execution of strategy to succeed. As the human forces approached the outer sector, the Seroth commander, Calith, stood on the bridge of his personal warship, the Dominion of Ruin. His fists clenched in frustration as his advisors reported the developments. The loss of the Sovereign's wrath had shaken the Seroth, but Calith was not one to be easily defeated. His people had conquered entire galaxies. One failure would not undo their centuries of power. They think they can defeat us with a handful of scavenged ships. Calith growled, his voice low and menacing. Send a message to the fleet. No mercy. But even as he issued his orders, Calith's sharp instincts told him something wasn't right. The human fleet, while small, was approaching the outer edges of their defensive perimeter at an unexpected angle, forming a loose, chaotic formation that made no sense. It was a trap. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Calith barked, his voice now cold with calculation. They're attempting to feint. We will not be fooled. As Calith's ships pivoted to meet the human threat head-on, the human fleet broke into two separate groups. One group, led by the Vigilant, veered toward the Seroth's main fleet, engaging in a daring frontal assault. Meanwhile, the second group, composed of smaller ships, slipped into the shadows of the debris field surrounding the Seroth command ships, preparing for a stealth strike. Commander Foster's heart raced as the first phase of the plan began. The Vigilant fired its main cannons, targeting one of the larger Seroth warships at the front of the enemy line. The resulting explosion shook the battlefield, sending shockwaves through the enemy ranks. It was enough of a disruption to force Calith to focus on the immediate threat, giving the stealth team their opening. Ether, we're in position, Foster said, his voice tense. Initiate the secondary strike. Acknowledged, Ether replied, and the AI instantly adjusted the fleet's positioning, coordinating the small ships as they maneuvered toward the Seroth's command vessels. The smaller ships, equipped with cloaking devices and minimal radar signatures, quietly slid into position. They were now within range of the command ships, and the timing had to be perfect. Fire, Novak ordered. The human fleet unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, hammering the Seroth command ships with pinpoint precision. The command vessels were struck hard, their shields flickering and failing under the assault. The resistance had done it, an opening had been made. But the Seroth were quick to react. The remaining Seroth warships scrambled to intercept the attack, but the damage had been done. The human forces had taken out several command ships, crippling the Seroth's ability to communicate and organize. Chaos erupted in the Seroth fleet as their coordinated tactics fell apart. We've got them on the ropes, Foster said, his voice a mixture of hope and exhaustion. Now's our chance to finish this. But just as victory seemed within reach, an alarm blared across the Vigilant S bridge. Multiple incoming ships, Seroth reinforcements. Novak shouted. They're not giving up. The human fleet's victory was not assured. The Seroth were sending everything they had left, reinforcing their failing command ships and bringing in new warships to launch a final, desperate counteroffensive. The tide of battle was about to shift again, and the human resistance would have to adapt or face annihilation. The Vigilant S engines roared as Foster gripped the command console, his mind working furiously. This was humanity's final chance. The reinforcements were formidable, but the Seroth were spread thin. If they could outlast the oncoming wave, they might just break the enemy for good. Ether, how long until reinforcements arrive? Foster asked. 5 minutes, Ether responded, its voice as calculated as ever. 5 minutes. Foster's gaze hardened. There was no turning back now. The final phase of the battle had begun, and humanity's future rested on the next few minutes. The battlefield was a chaotic mess of fire and debris as the human fleet fought tooth and nail against the relentless Seroth onslaught. The last moments of the battle were unfolding before them, and for Commander James Foster, it felt as though time was standing still. Every move, every decision could be their last. The Seroth reinforcements were closing in, faster than expected, and it was only a matter of time before the human fleet was overwhelmed. Ether, status report, Foster barked, his voice sharp, filled with urgency. Reinforcements will arrive in approximately 3 minutes, Ether responded. Asterisk, current human fleet strength is holding, but significant losses are imminent. Asterisk. Foster's eyes flicked to the tactical map, watching as human ships scattered, trying to avoid the overwhelming firepower of the Seroth reinforcements. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and on the verge of collapse. Yet, for all the fear and tension building in the pit of his stomach, he knew one thing. They could not retreat. Humanity had already sacrificed too much.
It was do or die.
Novak, Foster said, turning toward his chief scientist and strategist. What's our next moves? Elena Novak, her face pale from exhaustion but still resolute, looked up from her console. We need a decoy, a diversion. Something to give us just enough time to launch our final offensive. The Vigilant and a few other ships can hit them from the rear, while the rest of the fleet pulls back to the secondary lines. If we can disrupt their command for just a few more minutes, we might be able to take down their lead warship and destabilize their forces. Foster nodded grimly. Do it. We don't have time to second-guess. Without another word, Novak activated the necessary protocols, relaying the orders to the fleet. The human forces, battered and broken but still determined, responded with a surge of adrenaline. The ships, though damaged, aligned in their positions. One last strike, one final effort to break the Seroth's grip on their dying war. We'll be exposed, Novak warned. We'll need to outmaneuver them at all costs. Foster's jaw tightened.
I know.
But we're going in anyway. On the bridge of the Dominion of Ruin, Seroth Commander Kalith's patience was wearing thin. His fleet was scattered, suffering under the relentless onslaught of the human fleet. But despite the chaos, his instincts told him one thing. The humans were on the verge of breaking. Their ships were few and far between now, and they would have to retreat soon. His victory was within reach. He could feel it. The screens before Kalith flashed red as a new set of human ships, small and agile, broke from the main human formation, drawing attention away from the rest of the fleet. The Seroth commander smirked as he watched the bait. They want to play games, do they? Kalith muttered, watching as the smaller human ships taunted his fleet, luring them into a trap. Send all remaining ships after them. Finish them off. The Seroth responded with lightning speed, dispatching their forces to intercept the decoy. However, Kalith was too eager. His mistake was in his overconfidence. He failed to see what was happening in the background. The true human assault was about to begin.
Now,
Foster shouted, watching as the human fleet split into two groups. The decoys took the full brunt of the Seroth's attention, distracting them long enough for the rest of the human ships to position themselves for the final strike. The Vigilant roared to life as its engines flared, propelling it forward at breakneck speeds. The remaining human ships, though outnumbered and outgunned, pushed their engines to the limit, circling around the edges of the battle. Foster's pulse quickened as the lead Seroth warship, a massive behemoth bristling with weapons, loomed ahead. Ether, Foster said, his eyes narrowing. Focus all remaining energy on the railguns. Full power, no limits. Asterisk, understood. Full power to railguns and long-range targeting systems. Asterisk. The Vigilant-S main guns flared, firing a concentrated pulse of energy that hit the lead Seroth warship dead center. The first shot sent a ripple of energy across the ship's shields, causing it to flicker. The second shot, more precise, hit a critical weak point in the Seroth warship's hull, creating a massive explosion that rippled outward. Keep it going, Foster commanded. Don't let up. But just as the human fleet began to press their advantage, the Seroth retaliated with an overwhelming counterattack. The remaining warships concentrated their fire on the human ships, and the space around the Vigilant erupted in blinding explosions. The Vigilant shuddered as several hits struck its hull, its shields flickering. Status. Novak shouted, her voice filled with tension. Shields at 20%, Ether reported calmly. Structural integrity holding, but damage is significant. Foster clenched his fists. They were taking fire, but they couldn't afford to slow down now. Every second counted. We need more time, Novak exclaimed. Ether, Foster said through gritted teeth. Activate the Inferno protocol. Bring down their shields, now. The Inferno Protocol was a last-ditch maneuver designed to unleash a devastating EMP pulse at point-blank range, disabling the shields of enemy ships for a few critical moments. The Vigilant's energy reserves were low, but there was just enough power left for one final strike. Acknowledged, Ether responded. Activating EMP pulse. Full power. The Vigilant's weapon systems aligned, and a shockwave of electromagnetic energy erupted outward, cascading through the enemy fleet. The Seroth shields collapsed under the intensity of the pulse, leaving them vulnerable.
Now.
Fire everything, Foster shouted. Every remaining ship in the human fleet unleashed its weapons in a unified barrage. The Seroth ships, now exposed, were torn apart by the human assault. Explosions erupted throughout the fleet, one after another, as the remaining Seroth vessels crumbled under the pressure. But Caliph, despite the chaos, was not ready to give up. The Seroth commander gritted his teeth as he watched his fleet shatter. He would die before he allowed the humans to win. Prepare to board their ship, Caliph bellowed. We fight until the end. On the Vigilant. Foster knew that the Seroth were not done yet. But for the first time in this entire war, he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months: hope. They were not done, and they were not going to surrender. The final assault had begun. The chaos of battle continued to rage across the stars. The human fleet, battered and bruised, had managed to strike a devastating blow against the Seroth warships. The Vigilant's relentless assault had broken through the enemy's outer defenses, and their remaining forces were scattered. But Caliph, the Seroth commander, still clung to his unyielding determination. The battle was far from over. The Vigilant's bridge was a storm of noise, flashing lights, and rapid commands. Foster stood at the center of it all, his focus laser-sharp, as he watched the damaged fleet of Seroth warships attempt to regroup. The Vigilant was in critical condition, its hull scarred from countless impacts, but it had withstood the worst the Seroth could throw at it. For now, it was still operational, still capable of striking back. Ether, tactical analysis, Foster said, his voice firm. The Seroth fleet is significantly weakened, Ether reported. Asterisk, however, Commander Caliph has ordered a full-scale boarding action against the Vigilant. Their final assault force is preparing to launch from the remaining warships. Asterisk. Foster's expression hardened. He had known this was coming. The Seroth would fight until the last. If they couldn't win from space, they would attempt to board and take the ship in close quarters. Prepare for boarding, Foster ordered, turning to Novak. We need to make sure they don't get a foothold on this ship. Understood, Novak replied, her voice resolute. I'm initiating lockdowns in all sections. Weapons systems on standby. The atmosphere on the bridge became tense as the seconds ticked by. On the view screen, the Seroth ships were closing in. Their movements were calculated and deliberate. Their last-ditch effort was clear. They wanted to board the Vigilant and take it by force. We won't let that happen, Foster muttered under his breath. On the bridge of the Dominion of Ruin, Caliph surveyed the battlefield, his golden eyes burning with frustration. The humans had somehow withstood his every attack, yet now, with their fleet scattered, he saw an opportunity. It was a final gambit, one that would demand his best warriors, but Caliph was willing to sacrifice everything to ensure victory. Send the elite boarding teams to the Vigilant, Caliph ordered, his voice unwavering. We take that ship, and the humans will be broken. Their morale will collapse once they see their command vessel in our hands. The ship's doors slid open, revealing rows of armored warriors. The Seroth elite boarding party was equipped with cloaking devices, plasma blades, and specialized weapons for close combat. These warriors were the best of the best, the very tip of the Seroth spear. Caliph's soldiers would take the Vigilant by force. No more calculations, no more second chances. Back on the Vigilant, the crew braced for impact. The warning lights blinked red across the hallways as the ship's security systems kicked into gear. Heavy blast doors slammed down, dividing the ship into smaller, defensible sections. Foster and Novak stood side by side as they watched the security readouts on the bridge. They're coming, Novak said, her voice grim. The boarding parties are preparing to breach. Foster turned to his team. We don't stop them here. We don't stop them at all. All hands, prepare for close combat. The air was thick with tension as the first explosions shook the ship, reverberating through its corridors. The outer walls of the Vigilant were being pounded by the Serath's boarding pods. Each hit was a reminder of the stakes of this fight. If the Serath breached the ship, it would be the end of the human resistance. Hold the line, Foster shouted as he made his way to the front of the bridge, leading the charge with a fierce determination. This is our home. We fight for Earth. We fight for humanity. The crew cheered, rallying around their commander. They knew what was at stake. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. The first breach occurred in the lower decks, where the first group of Serath warriors stormed through the ship's hull. Their cloaking devices rendered them nearly invisible, making them difficult to detect until it was too late. The ship's defenses had been weakened after the battle, but the human crew was quick to respond. In the darkness of the hallway, the Serath elite soldiers moved with precision, their weapons humming with deadly energy. The humans, armed with blasters and energy shields, fought fiercely to hold their ground. The corridors erupted in gunfire as the two forces collided in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Foster watched the live feed from the security cameras, his heart pounding. He saw the first boarding pod hit, and immediately, the air was filled with the sound of desperate firefights and explosions. But the humans were resilient. They had been trained for this. They were ready. The first group of Serath was met with a hail of fire from human soldiers stationed along the corridors. The Vigilant's security systems allowed them to create choke points, funneling the invading forces into concentrated areas where they could be annihilated. But even with the advantage of knowing the ship's layout, the Serath were fierce. Their superior strength and advanced technology made them formidable opponents. Foster clenched his fists. They couldn't let the Serath establish a foothold. Send a squad to reinforce Deck 3, he ordered. We need to hold them off until we can cut off their supply routes. Novak nodded and relayed the order. The crew mobilized quickly, positioning themselves in strategic locations across the ship. The fighting was relentless. The corridors of the Vigilant were now a battleground, with the sounds of energy weapons, combat shouts, and explosions filling the air. Every hallway became a line in the sand, and every human who stood there fought with everything they had. Despite their tactical advantages, the Serath elite soldiers were not easily defeated. Their strength was in their numbers and their training. They had breached multiple sections of the ship, and it seemed like nothing could stop them. But Foster knew one thing: they couldn't win this war by brute force alone. It had to be a war of willpower. The human crew fought with everything they had, clutching onto hope, courage, and sheer determination. They weren't going to lose this fight.
Not now.
On the Dominion of Ruin, Calith watched the human ship's defense with a mixture of admiration and frustration. The humans were proving to be tougher than anticipated. His warriors were slowly making progress, but it was taking longer than expected. Why aren't they retreating? Calith muttered. No matter. We'll break them. We always do. Back on the Vigilant, Foster stood before the strategic map, watching as the final push began. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Time was running out, but the human resolve was stronger than any Serath force. He knew they could win this. This ends now, Foster muttered, his hand gripping the console. We fight until the last breath. The last stand of the Vigilant had reached its boiling point. The ship, battered and scarred, still held strong against the relentless assault of the Serath elite boarding teams. Every inch of the vessel had become a battleground, from its cold metal corridors to the very heart of its command center. Commander James Foster stood at the center of the storm, his eyes narrowed as he watched the security feeds. On the lower decks, the humans had pushed the Serath back, one small victory at a time. Each wave of alien soldiers that stormed the ship was met with intense resistance, as human soldiers, though exhausted, fought with the tenacity and fury of a species that would not be extinguished. The corridors were thick with smoke and debris, but the battle for the Vigilant had become more than just a fight for survival. It had become a fight for humanity's future. "We're holding them off, Commander," Novak reported from her station, her voice unwavering despite the chaos. "But they keep coming. We're running out of time." Foster nodded grimly. He had seen this coming. Calitha's forces were relentless, and the Seroth had one last desperate gambit. If they couldn't destroy the humans in space, they would do it by boarding the ship and taking it from within. "Novak," Foster said, his voice full of resolve, "prepare the self-destruct sequence. If it comes to that, we take them down with us." The decision weighed heavily on him, but Foster knew that if they were going to lose the Vigilant, they would make sure the Seroth never walked away from it. Not with their prize, not with the humans' legacy. "But, Commander," Novak began, "there's still a chance.
The fleet is on its way.
We just need to hold for a little longer." Foster's eyes narrowed. His mind raced with possibilities, but the clock was ticking, and every passing moment brought the Seroth closer to the bridge. "We don't have a little longer. We're going to end this now. We can't wait for reinforcements. We are the reinforcements." On the Dominion of Ruin, Calith observed the dwindling moments of his final assault. His elite soldiers had made it to the core of the Vigilant, but they were stalled. The humans had fortified their position at every turn, and the corridor to the command center was now nothing but a mess of debris, bodies, and scorched metal. "Do not let them retreat," Calith roared to his remaining warriors. "Crush them. We will not lose." But Calitha's anger and frustration were now mingled with something else: doubt. The humans weren't breaking. In fact, they were making one final stand that was costing the Seroth dearly. He watched the footage from his command deck, seeing his forces falter, and something deep within him understood the futility of this assault. His soldiers were too few, their spirits fraying as they faced an enemy that would rather die than yield. "Commander," one of his officers cried, "we've received word from the remaining fleet. They are retreating. The humans have pushed them back." Calitha's blood boiled. He had underestimated the humans, and now their resolve was breaking his. His fleet, the mighty Seroth, the invincible conquerors of galaxies, were retreating. And now, it seemed, the Vigilant was slipping from his grasp as well. Back on the Vigilant, the final battle raged in the heart of the ship. Foster stood before the bridge's blast doors, staring into the dark, awaiting the oncoming assault. The crew around him was prepared for the final push. But deep down, he knew something had shifted. The Seroth were faltering. They were no longer the unstoppable force they once seemed to be. "Ether," Foster said, turning toward the ship's AI. "Activate the final phase. All remaining power to the main weapons. We end this now." Asterisk acknowledged, Commander. "Activating final protocol." Asterisk. The lights dimmed as the remaining energy surged into the Vigilant's weapon systems. The ship's cannons hummed with power, and the crew braced for what was coming. The time for defense was over. It was time for humanity to strike. The blast doors to the command center shuddered under the pressure of the next wave of Seroth forces. Foster took a deep breath, his mind clear despite the chaos around him. They had nothing left to lose. "Open fire," Foster ordered. The Vigilant unleashed its final barrage, sending a barrage of energy blasts at the breached boarding parties. The shockwaves tore through the ship's interior, pushing back the Seroth warriors who had made it to the heart of the command center. Explosions erupted from the walls as the Vigilant became a massive weapon, cutting through the invaders with brutal precision. On the Dominion of Ruin, Calitha's heart sank. His forces were falling back. He saw the live footage of his soldiers being torn apart by the overwhelming firepower of the Vigilant. The human ship was now an unstoppable juggernaut, and the Seroth were losing their grip. "We cannot win this," Calith muttered to himself. The remnants of his fleet, already crippled by the earlier human attacks, were now retreating in disarray. The battle for Earth was lost. Back on Earth, the skies above the planet began to clear. The remaining Seroth warships, unable to withstand the human resolve, began to disengage and retreat into the farthest reaches of space. The war, which had once seemed so unwinnable, had turned in humanity's favor. But even as the final shots rang out across the cosmos, the Vigilant's crew was not celebrating. The cost had been high, too high. They had won, yes, but it had come at the cost of their comrades, their ships, and countless sacrifices. Foster stood before the command console, looking at the damage reports. The Vigilant was in ruins, its systems barely holding together. But Earth was safe. "We did it," Novak said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and sorrow. "We actually did it." Foster nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of their victory. The battle for Earth was over. Humanity had survived. But the cost of their greatest victory was a somber reminder. War leaves no true victors. The human spirit, however, had proved to be a force of nature. In the face of unimaginable odds, humanity had shown the Seroth and the universe that it was not a species to be underestimated. As the Vigilant limped back toward Earth, Foster looked out the viewport at the vastness of space. The stars seemed a little brighter now. Earth was safe.
For now.
But one thing was certain: humanity would never forget how they earned their greatest victory.